Hey fellow music fans, welcome back to Psychology of Rock. If you're new to the channel, my name's Nina, and I am so excited for today's analysis because we are diving deep into the personality of one of the most brilliant young artists of our time, the one and only Paulina of The Warning. She serves as the band's drummer and primary lyricist. She also sings backup vocals and sometimes even lead vocals on some of the tracks. She certainly has an amazing voice, and she definitely has a lot to say. Now, a few years back, I was asked to speculate about her MBTI personality profile, as well as her sister's. And if you're not familiar with what that is, I'm just referring to the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, which is a personality test that categorizes people into 16 different possible personality types. It is a really fun test that is extremely popular in pop culture, but we don't tend to use it in clinical settings because there are other tests that are regarded as more scientifically valid and a lot more reliable. And even though I really enjoyed making those videos, it has been a while, and I really wanted the opportunity to reanalyze the sisters using the 5-factor model of personality, which is what I typically use. And I will, of course, get to Dany and LA in the near future, but this video would be ridiculously long if I tried to do them all at once. So today is going to be all about Pau. Now, in the original video, I determined that Pau's likely MBTI personality profile was an ENFP, which I later found out she confirmed was accurate in one of her videos, so I'm glad we got that right. But I think that today's analysis should be a lot more thorough and a lot more interesting because I've just had so many more years to observe her, not directly, of course. I've never had the pleasure of actually meeting her, but there have just been so many more interviews since then and so much more footage. I think we've all gotten to know her a lot better, and all of this information will certainly help us to better determine her true personality type. Now, to be clear, this analysis is completely speculative and, like I said, based solely on public observations. We don't see her behind closed doors, we only see what she puts out there. And it's also true that every single person puts on a persona to some degree, even those of us who are not in the public eye. We all have a public side and a private side. However, I do think that Pau is as authentic as possible and is very genuine even as a public figure. So I actually think that we can gauge her personality more accurately than we could for many other performers. As always, however, I have to give the caveat that I am in no way attempting to speak for Pau or suggesting that this analysis is 100% accurate, and I would love to hear whether or not you agree with this assessment in the end, so please feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. And before we begin, I just want to quickly talk about why this particular test is my favorite and why I think it can help us to understand someone a little bit better than the MBTI. So firstly, the Big Five is based on extensive empirical research and statistical analysis, whereas the MBTI is more rooted in psychological theory. So that in itself makes a big difference. But what I like most about this test is that it treats personality traits as continuous dimensions and recognizes that individuals can vary in degree on each trait. And that's why in this test, we measure them as percentages. The MBTI, on the other hand, only categorizes people into one option or the other, is either or. So, for example, it makes you select whether someone is an introvert or an extrovert. It doesn't specify how extroverted that person is. So even if you were, let's say, 51% extroverted, you'd still be classified as an extrovert, even though in reality you are in the middle and would greatly differ from someone who was like 98% extroverted. So clearly we have a lot more nuance here. It also measures a lot more specific factors, which includes the 5 broad dimensions of personality, which you can remember through the acronym OCEAN: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, as well as the 6 unique facets within these dimensions, and I will describe them all as we go. But this gives us a total of 30 data points to analyze, which can obviously give us a much more detailed understanding of someone's personality. It really is my absolute favorite type of personality assessment to conduct, and Pau is one of my favorite people in the entire music industry right now. So this was a super fun analysis for me, and I hope you will not only enjoy it, but feel even more connected to her in the end. So with all of that being said, let's go ahead and dive on in. So in the Big Five test, what the trait openness to experience measures is our tendency to think creatively, appreciate new ideas, and embrace change. The 6 facets we use to assess this are fantasy, which is our tendency to engage in daydreaming and imagination, aesthetics, which is our level of appreciation for beauty, art, and nature, feelings, which is our sensitivity to our own emotions and the emotions of others, actions, which is our willingness to try new things and embrace novel experiences, ideas, which is the extent of our intellectual curiosity and our interest in abstract thinking, and lastly, values, which is our openness to unconventional values and beliefs. So in other words, people who score high in this trait are going to be highly creative and imaginative, curious, open-minded, tolerant of different perspectives, emotionally aware. They can easily find beauty in the world around them. They are usually very intellectual and adventurous. They tend to be drawn to creative fields, and other people often find them to be pretty unconventional. Now, I think that this is the trait that Pau would actually score the highest in all around. I mean, I think she would almost score off the scale in some of these, but I'm just going to say that she would likely score incredibly high in all 6 of these facets. I don't even think that we need to go through them one by one. This is something that is easily observable in her personality and in her behavior, and I think it has a lot to do with why she is such a great lyricist. Her creative imagination, her appreciation for beauty, her emotional depth, adventurous spirit, intellectual curiosity, and tolerance for diversity are all hallmarks of this trait. But next we have the dimension of conscientiousness, which measures our tendency to be organized, disciplined, and goal-oriented. The 6 facets we use to assess this are competence, our belief in our own abilities and confidence in our capacity to achieve goals, orderliness, our preference for organization, structure, and planning, dutifulness, our sense of responsibility and obligation, achievement striving, our desire to achieve success and excel, self-discipline, our ability to control impulses, resist temptations, and persist in the face of obstacles, and deliberation, which is our tendency to think carefully before acting. So in other words, people who score high in this trait are usually known to be organized, methodical, have a strong sense of order and structure, responsible, reliable, hardworking, and ambitious, motivated to achieve their goals, self-disciplined and focused, able to resist distractions and stay on task, and are generally pretty cautious and deliberate, especially when making decisions. Now, I don't think that Pau would score nearly as high in this trait. Broad stroke, I'd say that she'd score moderate all around, but I think for this one, we really have to look at each facet because I think she'd kind of be up and down here. So for competence, I'd say she'd likely be fairly high. She seems to have a strong belief in her abilities and definitely seems motivated when she wants to do something. For orderliness, however, my guess is that she'd score fairly low. She seems to be much more spontaneous and a lot less focused on structure and routine. Now for dutifulness, I'd probably have to go with moderate. I think she clearly seems to be reliable and responsible, but I also think that she likely struggles with following rules that she doesn't see as having a specific purpose or fully agree with. For achievement striving, I definitely go with high. We can see that she's certainly ambitious and goal-oriented, especially when she's passionate about something. Now for self-discipline, I would have to go with low to moderate, only because I think she may struggle with procrastination, especially when tasks are tedious or uninspiring. Because I believe she has shared on some platforms at least that she has ADHD or ADHD tendencies. And as someone with ADHD myself, that is definitely something that we can find very challenging. And for the last facet, deliberation, I'm also going to go with low to moderate for the same reason. I would not be surprised if she also struggles with being somewhat impulsive and not always being able to think things through carefully. But believe it or not, I think that impulsivity can actually fuel creativity in some ways. So I don't necessarily see this as being some kind of big disadvantage to her. Okay, the next trait is extraversion, which measures our tendency to be outgoing, sociable, and assertive. And the 6 facets we use to assess this are warmth, our tendency to be friendly, cooperative, and compassionate; gregariousness, our preference for social interaction and company; assertiveness, our likelihood of taking charge and being dominant; activity level, our predisposition for a fast-paced, stimulating lifestyle; excitement seeking, our level of inclination to seek out new and exciting experiences; and positive emotions, which is our tendency to experience emotions like joy, enthusiasm, and happiness. Now, of course, the other side of the spectrum here would be introversion, but people who score high in extroversion are going to be outgoing and comfortable in social situations. They're going to be assertive and confident and not afraid to speak their minds and take charge. They're usually known for being pretty energetic and enthusiastic and are generally positive and optimistic most of the time. Now, for this trait, I definitely think she'd score high overall. In fact, I think she'd score fairly high in every single facet. I don't think we even need to go through them one by one. She comes across as being very friendly, extremely comfortable in every setting I've seen her in, from interviews to shows. She is clearly inclined to take charge and be the leader in situations. I think overall she enjoys a fast-paced lifestyle. I think she'd be bored if she didn't have it, even though I'm sure it is tiring and overwhelming for her sometimes. She also seems to be extremely excitement-seeking, and I think for the most part she seems to be pretty enthusiastic and happy. Now, no one is like that all the time, but I would definitely characterize her as being exuberant and high-spirited more often than not, at least publicly, which would be extremely hard to pull off without being high in this trait. I do want to say, however, that I also sense that Pau also has a need for solitude to kind of reflect on her experiences and her thoughts and feelings despite her social nature. And I also see her as being very comfortable spending time alone, which is not always true for extroverts, even though she doesn't actually seem to have much time alone. So while I think Pau is undoubtedly extroverted, there is a little bit more nuance to this aspect of her personality. Now, next we have the trait of agreeableness, which measures our tendency to be cooperative, kind, and compassionate. The 6 facets we use to assess this are trust, our inclination to believe in the good intentions of others; straightforwardness, our tendency to be honest and direct; altruism, our propensity to be selfless and helpful; compliance, our willingness to yield to the wishes of others; modesty, our tendency to be humble and self-effacing; and tender-mindedness, which is our inclination to be empathetic and compassionate. So in other words, people who score high in this trait are usually very kind and willing to work with others to help them out. They are not easily suspicious or resentful of other people. They tend to be very empathetic and sensitive, and they come across as being very modest and humble. And people tend to see them as being very warm, friendly, and easy to get along with. So how would Pau score in this trait? Well, overall, I see her as probably scoring moderate to high, but this is one where I think it's really helpful to go through the facets one by one because I think it would be different for each, although I do not think that she would be low in any of them. So for trust, I'd say her score would be moderate. I think she prefers to observe and assess people before fully trusting them. I also think that she seems to be very intuitive, so I think her discernment is probably pretty sharp. She seems like she can read people extremely well. For straightforwardness, however, I think she would score pretty high. I think she seems to be very direct. I think she is definitely mindful of other people's feelings, but she also does not seem to be afraid to speak her mind. For altruism, I tend to think that she'd score moderate to high. We can clearly see that she's a very caring and compassionate person and that she sometimes even goes out of her way to help others. But I do think that she still considers her own needs and priorities. I think she's better characterized as a giving person rather than a selfless person, if that makes sense. Now, for compliance, I'm going to go with moderate. We can see that she's willing to compromise. We know that she has to do that when she is songwriting with her sisters. But she also has very strong opinions and she is not afraid to express them. So I think that her compliance has a lot to do with the situation and the other people involved. I don't see her complying just because she is supposed to. For modesty, I'm also going to go with moderate. While I do think she's very humble given all her incredible talents, I also think that she comes across as being confident in her abilities and achievements, and rightfully so. She also tends to post a lot more than her sisters on social media. She posts a lot of selfies and things like that, which is perfectly appropriate for her age and what she is doing in her life right now. So I think in the end, it all kind of evens out to being moderate. Now, for tender-mindedness, I think she would score moderate to high. She's definitely empathetic and caring, and we have seen her express deep concern for others in interviews and even in song lyrics. She does, however, also have a strong sense of self and can seemingly maintain her boundaries in most situations. And now we get to the final trait, which is neuroticism. Now, this measures our tendency to experience negative emotions, such as anxiety, sadness, and anger. The 6 facets we use to assess this are anxiety, which is our propensity to feel anxious, worried, and nervous; angry hostility, our inclination to experience anger and hostility; depression, our tendency to experience sadness, hopelessness, and low mood; self-consciousness, our level of being self-conscious and sensitive to criticism; immoderation, which is our likelihood to engage in impulsive and risky behaviors; and finally, vulnerability, which is just our tendency to experience these negative emotions easily. So in other words, if we score high in this trait, we're probably often anxious and worried, we are easy to anger, we're often in a low mood, we're sensitive to criticism and easily offended, and we may act without really thinking through the consequences. So for Pau, overall, I think that she would score fairly low for neuroticism. Now, that's not to say that I don't think she experiences negative emotions. Of course she does. We all do. And I do think she experiences her emotions very, very deeply. But she also seems in general to be resilient and optimistic, and it seems like she's able to kind of bounce back from her setbacks pretty quickly and maintain a positive outlook, even in really challenging situations. But for this trait, I also don't think that we could accurately go through the facets and make individual determinations that I would be fully confident in, because as a performer, if there is anything that you are going to keep guarded or keep out of the public eye, it's likely going to be these types of factors. And that makes it extremely difficult to precisely assess someone's level of neuroticism based solely on their public persona.
Don't come to me saying that you care, that I was the one who was never there. Or don't come with your lights in the air. You keep blaming me and it ain't fair.
Even though I think that Pau is one of the most open and honest artists out there, it's still true that performers in particular have a lot of pressure on them to present this positive and upbeat image, even when they may be experiencing negative emotions. I think she channels a lot of her negative emotions and a lot of her negative experiences into her lyrics, which I'm sure is really cathartic for her. But still, based on what we can publicly observe at least, I think it seems reasonable to conclude that Pau would score relatively low in neuroticism, maybe bumping slightly into moderate. So based on these speculative scores in all 30 of these facets, I can now give you a final analysis of what I think her strongest characteristics are. Again, this is just my opinion, but here goes. Now, overall, I think that Pau is a pretty complex and multifaceted individual, and I mean that in the very best way possible. She is creative and imaginative. She enjoys exploring new ideas. She's emotionally deep and attuned to the emotions of herself and to other people. She's adventurous and curious. She can easily explore different perspectives. She's obviously highly intelligent and seems to enjoy learning new things. I think she can be both spontaneous and organized depending on the situation and her level of interest. I think she's probably pretty perfectionistic about the things that she cares about. She's goal-oriented and generally self-motivated, even though, like anyone else with ADHD, she probably struggles with self-discipline when it comes to things that she's not intrinsically motivated by. She seems to be very outgoing and comfortable in social settings. She's definitely energetic and enthusiastic, as well as assertive, direct, and confident in her abilities. She's a great communicator. She's incredibly charismatic and passionate. She also seems to be very empathetic and caring. She works well with others and can bring out the best in people and can easily connect with them on an emotional level. She is obviously a natural-born leader. She's able to motivate the people around her. I think that she's also incredibly intuitive and self-aware. She is resilient. I think she has a positive outlook, and I think that her ability to balance her introspective side with her extroverted nature makes her not only a unique and fascinating person, but it also helps her be the artist that she is. I think Pal's personality type helps to explain why she truly excels in her various roles in the band, because her characteristics help her to be an amazing songwriter and lyricist and performer and even just idea generator. The way her brain works, she's never going to run out of ideas. She will always be able to come up with new themes and concepts because she hates being bored and she's truly driven by her creativity. I think that creating is like breathing for her. And I also think that it's her chosen tool of self-expression and connection, which I also believe are critical needs for her personality type. But anyway, there you have it, what I believe would be Pal's likely scores in the Big Five Personality Index, and I would love to hear if you agree with this assessment, and if not, how you would score her. Again, only Pal knows for sure, and I want to thank her for being such an interesting person to analyze and for sharing so much of who she is as a person with her audience. Now, if you enjoyed this assessment, please let me know if you would be interested in assessments for Dany and Ale. You can find all three sisters' MBTI analyses in the description box along with the entire warning playlist. I want to thank you so much for watching and in advance for your comments, and I will see you in the next video.